7 years after first exploring the plane of Theros, MTG's Greek myth-inspired set, we finally return to a fan favourite plane, with many rich narrative threads to tie up and opportunity to tread new ground. But with bold decisions made by Wizards of the Coast in regards to story delivery, many players weren't sure if the flavour expectations they had would be met. Will the memory of Theros Beyond Death fade into the seas of Nerono, or will its glorious tale be worthy of Elysia? Welcome to Magic the Flavouring, the Magic the Gathering podcast, where we talk about all things Magic flavour design and lore. My name is Andy Mann.
Hello, Nathan Cancel.
And we are here to do our Theros Beyond Death flavour set review.
Yes, indeed.
Oh, starting already. I can't talk today. I'm very sorry. It's already starting well.
You're excited, aren't you?
Yeah, I'm very excited. I liked this set. I thought it was a great set. This is obviously different to Eldraine. So the last time we did a flavour review, it was for Eldraine, which was a completely new plane. So the expectations were, although people had preconceptions to the stories they were trying to tell in terms of how it was going to play out actually as a game, I think people were maybe a bit more forgiving of what they expected. This is a return set.
Yeah.
So for you, how does that change up what you're expecting from this set?
Well, I guess going into set, there's already going to be the premise of it having to follow on at least some amount of storyline from the last one.
Yeah.
And at least have a similar aesthetic. Obviously, the art direction and the flavour of the plane, that kind of thing, should remain consistent unless you do a complete Rise of the Eldrazi kind of thing and completely change how the set how the plane looks.
Yeah.
Obviously, you've got a lot you can learn from the last set. You'll have a lot of feedback on what mechanics worked, what things and what through lines they want to follow on in terms of like mechanical use.
Yeah.
I guess at that point you've also got to hope that you don't make it feel too stale compared to the last set. Still stay true to form, whilst also try and reinvent those things. Those three things in together are actually really difficult.
So to answer the question, a huge expectation.
Yeah, exactly.
And they've only got one set to kind of do all this in, whereas last time it was still the 3-block structure.
Yeah, well, this is the big thing. Like the Theros is one of those was one of the blocks where the paradigm of how they construct sets now is completely different to how they did it before. They used to be very set in the fact that they would do three sets to a block. You usually had the beginning of the story set in the plane, some amount of a transitional mid set, which usually which would be smaller, and then the last set, which would have a conclusion. Typically, they'd try and make mechanics that worked back with each other, but developed going forwards.
Yeah.
So, like, say, morph into megamorph, into manifest. If you look at like Fate Reforged and that kind of thing, having different mechanics that all work together synergistically. Problem is when you do that with 3 different sets. They got to a point of where, and they actively said this about Theros, of where it just started to feel a little bit dry. They kind of ran out of design space.
Well, I guess if you're doing things over 3 sets, you're spending almost an entire year trying to tell one sort of style of story.
And you want the beginning and the end of the set to feel coherent, but then you also want there to be enough movement in the cards that you don't get that boring, I'm playing the same +1/+1 counter theme for the entire year.
Yeah, sure. But also thematically as well, not just like with mechanics, but just trying to tell one story. Giving 3 sets, it adds something a bit more epic to it, because you can do bigger story arcs. But then, if people aren't into the story, or if they're maybe just thinking, the writing here isn't good, I don't like these characters, I don't like the plane. So with Eldraine, I spoke to a lot of people when I was actually playing it, whether it was at pre-release or wherever else, where they were just not into the fantasy, like the fairy tale story. So if you're into standard or whatever, I guess it's fine, because it's just one set, like a 1-set block, if you like. I guess there's a couple of ways you can go forward with this, depending, like Ethan Fleischer was the design lead on this, and I suppose there was a couple of ways they could have gone. They could have either told a very tight story and kept things very narrow and very focused, because they only had one sort of 250 card set to kind of deal with this. Or they could have gone, which is how I feel they have gone, they could have gone a very broad direction. And basically just had Theros Beyond Death be almost like, they're called expansion sets technically, and this very, very much felt like an expansion set to the other Theros blocks, as opposed to when we went to Ravnica last year, it felt like a completely new sort of thing. At least that's how I felt about it.
Well, with Ravnica, you kind of have to get all the guilds in a little bit, so you have a bit more of a deliberate structure. Like, I feel like you wouldn't be able to do Ravnica in 1 set. Like, they did it in 2, and then more of the spark. As much as it was a third Ravnica set, it felt like a very different kind of style. Yeah. Obviously, the first one was doing it felt like kind of similar like the first return, of where they did the 5 guilds, and then did all the guilds together.
Yeah, sure.
Obviously, Dragon's Maze was a bit of a disaster in terms of gameplay, draftability, all that kind of nonsense. But in this time, obviously, War of the Spark, again, you can play it by itself. You didn't need the other 2 sets to do so. With Theros, as much as there was a lot to try and get from 3 different sets, because there was a lot of critique over the fact that they felt that certain mechanics and certain styles were watered down, it kind of worked probably better to do it as one big cohesive set. Because you've got a lot of different things that you can play around with, but you don't necessarily want to, as you say, like get too much fatigue. Plus, it means you don't have to stretch a mechanic like Heroic or Constellation or Monstrous out. And we'll talk about all 3 of these. We'll talk about like the different mechanics that worked in the last set, which ones have come through, and the new things that they're playing with around today.
One of the big things that we need to note about this set, Theros Beyond Death, is Wizards of the Coast made quite a bold decision in terms of the storyline. So with War of the Spark, they had 2 books that came out, War of the Spark, Ravnica, and then War of the Spark Forsaken.
And then obviously you had Gathering Storm as well.
You had Gathering Storm. You had all the ancillary stories that we've spoken about ad hoc. For Eldraine, you had the Wildwood Quest as well. And people were expecting to have a novel, because there's a lot of story threads in the last Theros block that needed to be tied up. There was lots of story cliffhangers, there were lots of characters that needed to have some sort of resolution, and it seemed like if they weren't going to be doing weekly stories, Wizards of the Coast, that they'd be giving us a novel or an ebook or a novella, and they didn't. They gave us lore slides for what they considered to be key characters or key kind of story moments, which were maybe sort of 50 to 60 word kind of mini stories to kind of contextualize things.
Glorified flavor text.
And they also gave us a 1,000 roughly word
blurb, shall we call it?
Yeah, it was kind of like a story, like sort of spotlight, kind of like a whiz through.
It was a summary.
It was a summary of what happens in the entire story, and it is actually
it's a lot.
It's a lot of stuff, and it's, whilst I say that this set feels more broader in terms of its world building, the actual story that kind of went through is like a proper beginning, middle, and end story. So what we're not going to, for this flavour review, talk too much about whether we think it was a failure or a success making these decisions. I'm just telling you that these are the decisions that were made, and when we talk about individual cards like individual legendaries or planeswalkers, we are going to have to talk about them flavour-wise in terms of what we know about them.
But we might not have as much context.
That will be affected by the decisions that WotC made. We are going to be doing a State of the Story episode in about 2.5 weeks' time, where we will break down actually what we think about these decisions made, and there are some positives, there are a lot more negatives, spoilers, but that's not going to be for today, so just thought I'd give you a heads up before we dive into specific flavour things.
Well, I guess like one of the things we can look at is like kind of what compared to the Theros block before, like what's changed, like what like generally broadly what we're looking at, what kind of plane is Theros the second time that we've gone there. Like the first time it felt very, I've written down here, like, would you consider Theros to be a white plane?
No.
Because Innistrad's definitely a black plane. Well, Zendikar's a green plane. Ravnica's difficult because it's obviously got the guilds.
So when we speak about white, we're talking about sort of structure of belief. We're talking about sort of a social construct.
If you think about like the pantheon of gods and the way that works, doesn't that work? It works in a kind of almost that structured hierarchy, kind of like everything has its place. The way I look, the reason I brought this up, because I was looking through, when I just was looking through a brief overview, a lot of the white cards feel very similar to what they felt like in Theros. Right. In the other colours, they might feel a little bit different. I mean, green and white specifically, I think. We'll get into that a little bit later. But the other colours don't necessarily feel quite as similar. They don't feel as similar as they did before, because obviously we're looking at Nyx more. We're looking at the Underworld more. The green and the white cards tend to focus still much more on the mortal side of things. And in that way, when I was looking through the white cards, it felt very reminiscent of old Theros, to the point of where I wouldn't have noticed if a lot of these cards were printed in the first one.
Sure, like that's a good thing, right? You don't want to go back to a plane and it to actually be completely different from how you remember. Yeah,
the way I'm looking at like the way the theme and the flavour of the set as it stands is obviously it's the mortals. Not necessarily against the gods, but being influenced by the gods, because the gods are kind of at battle now, aren't they?
So the kind of the very sort of very brief overview of this storyline is that Heliod is trying to wipe all the other gods' influence out of Meletis, which is one of the big polises on Theros, and so he's trying to use his champion. So he's brought back Daxos from the Underworld. We're not quite sure how Daxos is, whether he's the same Daxos or whether he's just kind of an expression of Daxos.
Yeah, we don't know if he's conversationalist or if he's stoic. We don't know if he's happy about it.
Yeah, exactly. But essentially what it is that the 5 monocolour gods are in some kind of spat, some kind of war, essentially, with with each other, and they all have their own demigod representatives that are going around Theros and Meletis trying to overthrow one another.
Yeah.
And this leads to disgruntlement in the Underworld, because the more that trouble goes up top, the more the Underworld goes into disarray. We have a new god, which we'll talk about, called Clothis, god of destiny. She is the red-green god that has been in the Underworld this entire time, containing the Titans.
Yeah, sure, we'll just drop the Titans in casually.
Yeah, the Titans just going to get thrown in. So the Titans, much like an original Greek myth, were the kind of proto-gods, the primordial gods of Theros. She's been jailing, or keeping jail. She's being the jailer of them down in the Underworld. She's disgruntled with the monocolour gods, so she goes up top to try and sort them out. As she goes up top to try and sort them out and gets distracted, the Titans get released, there's a breach in the Underworld, and all the denizens of the Underworld start bleeding onto the top soil of Theros.
Yeah, so the big thing in this one is it's almost like, last one it was heroes versus monsters.
Yeah.
Whereas this one it feels like, as there is a backdrop of the gods fighting each other. It's not quite as prevalent as I think it should be. But the other half of it is the Underworld is coming back, basically. Everything's escaping from the Underworld.
Yeah, sure. Well, last time we were at Theros, the Underworld was there, and obviously it was represented in a lot of cards, because Erebus is the god of the Underworld, as is Athreos takes people to the Underworld. So it was there, but it was definitely not as explored anywhere near as much as, say, Nyx and Theros proper.
Well, yeah, well, the way I look at the way the set went around last time is you went from Theros into Journey into
Born of the Gods
into Journey into Nyx. The idea was we were getting closer and closer to the Underworld, and that was the journey that Ajani and Elspeth were taking, obviously, to go and find Xenagos when he ascended and find a way to kill him.
Yeah.
This obviously it ended with Elspeth being slaughtered. Poor Elspeth, she did nothing wrong. And now we've gone the opposite direction of where we've started, almost in the Underworld, and it's almost the Underworld coming back to Theros.
Yeah, sure. Which is something that people wanted.
Yeah.
Like, people wanted to see the Underworld.
We've been waiting to see Elspeth for how long? I mean, everyone wanted it ever since we saw that artwork, the masterpiece.
The masterpiece
where it had a mask.
Yeah, in the kind of that sort of promo pack thing, which cost like 300 quid.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, there was an artwork which had Elspeth with her returned mask in hand that had the same two orbs that were on God's End.
Yeah, and then she had this hole in her chest. I mean, obviously she's back and everything's hunky-dory. And that's a very interesting... again, the individual plot points are really interesting, and how they happen. But as the set feels, it does very much feel a little bit. It feels like it should. It does feel like the Underworld versus the Mortals.
I will say, going like as a kind of header leading into the other topics, is that whilst we didn't get a dedicated story proper, and we did have the lore slides, which were fine, but they didn't really give much going on. The flavour text and the artwork in this set, as well as what they've chosen to put onto cardboard in terms of highlights or story highlights or location highlights, has been really dense and has been really good at world building. The problem is that, and I say this as someone who obviously likes magic flavour, you have to really dig to find it. So that's, and that's been an issue with magic flavour for a long time. That's why a lot of people don't get invested in it, is because it's not just, oh, well, it's there if you want it. It's like, no, you have to like really go and try and find it.
To you, kind of like this almost harkens back to old school like magic sets of where you kind of you'd see a card and you'd have to kind of go, oh, actually I have to go look up exactly why that's doing what it's doing.
Some people like that though, and I do understand that. Like, some people prefer it to be sort of like just a kind of an abstract sprinkling of flavour. But I think when you're trying to tie up so many fan favourite storylines, this is what the trouble is. And I mean, we're drifting now into our kind of story like critique and all that kind of thing, but it is worth noting that there is a lot of flavour in this set.
But it's also interesting because we didn't necessarily get... it wasn't a direct follow-on thread either. Like, you don't actually see Ajani interacting much in this plane, considering the last we saw he was spreading discord amongst the amongst all the populace, trying to disband the gods. And this is something we'll talk about right then, because I like the idea of this is obviously where we are now with the set, and we'll probably end up being back at Theros at some point. There's no way they leave these tides. Yeah, we'll touch on that right at the end about where we think it might go going forwards.
Okay.
But I'd be surprised if this is the last we see of Theros. I'd be exceptionally surprised.
Okay, that's fair. So, all right. Well, we've got a lot to talk about. We're already 15 minutes in, and I think we've waffled.
Introed enough.
This is our intro. So let's just go dive straight into it. We're going to break things down by sort of very broad terms. So we're going to talk about gods, titans, legendaries, planeswalkers, all these kinds of things, and that will kind of stitch together our set review as a whole. So let's just dive into what I think are the most important things on Theros, which defines it more than any other plane, and that is the gods, right? So we've got the gods back. We've got the 5 monocolor gods. So that's Heliod, Thassa, Erebos, Perforos, and Nylea. We had Athreos as a box, buy a box promo when you bought a boost box. And we have the new 2-color god Clothis, god of destiny, which is the green-red god. But other than that, we didn't actually get any of the other 2-color gods.
No.
And we didn't get any new gods. I thought there was going to be like half a pantheon of new gods to be brought in. Really? And some of them maybe being 3 colours. Maybe a new monocolored god. Yeah. And they didn't do that.
Well, it's like in the previous story, there was this Ashiok managed to create Cacophony, who was very quickly stamped out by Afara. And this is maybe one of the things that I want to look at going into the next Theros set. But a lot of the flavour from the sub gods, or the 2-color gods, I don't want to call them demigods. Lesser gods, exactly. Have to come through the cards. I think the whole point is when you have a single set, and this is maybe an argument for how the set structure works. When you have 3 sets, it was easy for them to do 5, 5, and 5. They did the 5 monocolor, then 5 allied, then 5 enemy. I don't think they did allied and enemy. They might have. I don't know off the top of my head. I can't remember. But point being, they did 5 gods in each of the 3 sets to kind of fill out the 15 mythics. Mythic slots that you have to, because you wouldn't not put them at mythic. It would feel very silly not to have your gods at mythic. So even managing to get 6 of them, 7 obviously being the 7th being the buy box, that's still almost half of your mythics.
I mean, I definitely don't miss the 2-color gods, and I really like the 2-color gods. My favourite is Karametra. I really like Athreos.
Quite a lot of time for Crufix.
I mean, Crufix. I mean, they're all great. So they're all good. Yeah. But I don't necessarily miss them in the set because actually the story isn't really about them.
No.
We do get a lot of flavour text with them involved. There is one for Karametra. I know you were trying to see if Karametra was involved. Yeah. She is in a flavour text.
Is in it. Okay, I didn't see
she's in Mystic Repeal. But they all have either flavour text dedicated to them. Some of them have creatures that directly reference them or whatever.
Some of them have a lot more than others. Some of them have really interesting tidbits, whereas some of them it's just basically going, they're still here, don't worry.
Oh yeah, Farika, you were saying, seems to get a lot of time.
Farika's got a few.
Which is the green-black god.
The green-black one. People like Crufixens and Karanos only get 1. And then you get a couple from Fenax, which is quite interesting. I'm surprised that Fenax didn't make more of a role considering the escape and leaving the Underworld bit.
Now, Fenax is interesting. Fenax is the blue-black god of deception. It's interesting that we don't have him as a card. I'm interested to see that they didn't put him as the promo for buying the booster box, because his storyline actually gets advanced. We actually get much more of a backstory in him, because we learn that he was a mortal that then ascended to godhood in some fashion, much like Demigods did.
He was the first. He was the first returned, which then would have obviously sparked some amount of devotion to him, which would then elevate it in the same way that Xenagos needed to ascend to godhood through. I mean, he did it through some crazy rite of celebration,
the Great Revel.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Whereas I imagine with Fenax, he would have come back, and people would have been in awe of him coming back, and then that allowed him to become, more and more powerful, and then I imagine it allowed him then to allow more people to become returned, and allow for that. I mean, because
returned is such a big part of this set, though.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of got waylaid a little bit this time because a lot of the return from the graveyards and stuff like that, they're not coming back as return; they are literally escaping.
Sure.
So obviously that kind of takes that mechanical space up a little bit. Even with people like Daxos, who were, legendary returns, and I mean Timoret's still obviously around.
Yeah, sure. So all right, then Clothis. What do we think of Clothis, the new god, the new black-green god? So to read Clothis, red-green, sorry, is 1 red-green for a 4/5 legendary enchantment creature god. Clothis, god of destiny, indestructible, as many of the gods, if not all of them are. As long as your devotion to red and green is less than 7, Clothis isn't a creature, so still follows that dynamic. At the beginning of your pre-combat main phase, exile target card from a graveyard. If it was a land card, add green or red to your mana pool. Otherwise, you gain 2 life, and Clothis deals 2 damage to each opponent. So there's a lot to unpack here. Green, red, Gruul colours, god of destiny, and then having that ability.
I think you kind of need to separate the ability, the mechanical ability away from away from high identity a little bit. The way I look at her is I look at her like a Deathrite Shaman. and because obviously it does similar things where it's exiling cards, it's dealing damage, gaining life, or adding mana. She's doing all three in some capacity.
Yeah.
There was a little bit of criticism as to why and how red-green as a combination works for Destiny, because red should be the colour of freedom.
Now, I was thinking about this, and I've been thinking about it long and hard, which probably means it's convoluted and not what was the case, but this works in my brain. So I was looking back at a lot of cards from the old Theros sets, and from this one, and the idea of fate and weaving fate is actually spread across a lot of the colours. There was a black-white legendary, I think it was the Triad of Fates, that were essentially very much how Klothys is represented now. So fate isn't necessarily tied to those two colours on this plane. Fate's kind of just an inherent thing. So she's green and red. Green, as we've discussed, or we'll discuss actually, that episode hasn't happened yet, is the kind of colour of nature and natural law.
Natural order.
Red is the colour of chaos and freedom. So if fate is anything, it's the inevitability of nature and the chaos of like your unpredictable future. But because she's the god of it, she's the one that dictates how your fate plays out. In the storyline, her whole beef with Elspeth is that Elspeth is trying to change her fate by actively undermining the kind of rule of law in the Underworld and undermining the sort of stratus of the gods, which is why she creates her agents of fate to go after Elspeth. So this kind of duality, this balance of fate and chaos and destiny and natural law, I don't know. It's trying to crowbar it into a green-red shell.
I don't see it being that much of a stretch. The way I look at it is, if green's the colour of destiny and nature and your, as I say, your natural path in life, she's just really bloody pissed off that it's not working properly. She's just being forced, as we said about this last episode, about how you could technically add red to most characters given a moment. Like, look at Adjani Vengeant, very much a white-green planeswalker. White for most of his iterations, white-green now he's moved more into. When he was really pissed off that his brother got killed, because you would be, he was white-red because he was vengeant. And the whole point is, it's not necessarily you're not always going to be every aspect of a colour.
Sure.
And sometimes red isn't about what you believe; it's about the way that you deal with it and the way you're doing it. And Klothys has to be. You can't, if you are going to be tyrannical about destiny, it is going to incorporate some amount of redness, because you are going to be forceful and you're going to be passionate about the way that you do it. You're going to have negative reactions to people when they don't follow.
Now, so what you're saying is that green is like her natural state and red is the vengeant part of her trying to enact
it's almost the way that she expresses it.
I do like that explanation, and I do think that makes a lot of sense because of the way that she's portrayed in this set. However, the only counterbalance to that, and this isn't me offering an answer, this is just me kind of going, it could be, but it might not, is that her colour identity, the idea is that Xenagos was the green-red planeswalker from the last set, which he ascended into that slot because Klothys was absent. So has Klothys always been vengeful that Destiny is not followed?
But I imagine that she has to, I mean, especially in a place like Theros, where everyone's very keen on ensuring that they, live out their glory and things like that there is such an idea of destiny around the plane anyway, about the natural order of things. It is like, look at the way that you have a god of death, you have a god of death, you have a god that helps transition from life into death, you have a god that helps people escape from death back into life. Like, there is very much systems in place, and I feel like you're going to have to be a pretty forceful. Like, Destiny's very seems to be very easy to be messed around with in Theros, and obviously if she has to. Binding Titans is a massive undertaking, and clearly she had the drive and the commitment, which I don't necessarily know if a mono green god would have done. I mean, we don't know the context of the situation.
Yeah.
But also, between Klothys and Xenagos, there was known to be, or there was hinted at, a god of love that was there before. But because love might not necessarily have such a strong tie as say, like, death or the sun or the sea, it didn't permeate and didn't hold its place in the pantheon as comfortably, and I think it was only because obviously there was this gap that Xenagos was able to rise up anyway. I don't think it would have been so easy had he not found his way of shoehorning himself in there.
All right, so it does make sense.
I think it's more obviously you have to kind of detach, and as I said, when I said detach the mechanics away from it, we haven't talked about the mechanics at all.
Well, no, neither
I think the idea is that she's rewriting situations to the way that she wants it designed. So if she's exiling a land card, then obviously it creates mana. If she's exiling a creature, it's creating damage. It's a very weak through line, but I mean, I think it works.
No, that makes sense. I think that's
reweaving resources.
Most make sort of sense of it that I've heard. The artwork on the non sort of promo version is a brilliant piece of artwork by Magali Villeneuve. Very sort of daring sort of depiction of the god as well.
Yeah,
like, quite sexualized,
it's a little bit
actually.
risque, yeah.
Which I think, Magic. It's a quote unquote young adults game, but it's I think they do need to have some wiggle room. Not necessarily go back to the days of Alpha Beta, which was it wasn't
Earthbind, sorry.
Yeah, Earthbind. But I think they should take more sort of
people shouldn't be ashamed of bodies. In the same way there was the angel. There's an angel in Zendikar that has a bit of a belly on her, and people were like, "Oh, really?" And it's like, "What do you mean, oh, really?"
Yeah, what do you mean, oh, really? Yeah,
people
exactly.
Can look like how they want to look.
The card I have in front of my hand, the version of Clothis, is the Constellation one, which was done by Jason Engel, who did all the Constellation artworks for the gods and the Demigods. It is bonkers good. But these artworks are kind of split people down the line, but I'm
always a fan of any card that uses white writing. I don't know why.
Yeah.
I mean, I used to really, really hate things like foils or promos because I liked conformity, especially I used to play like standard constructed formats. Like I'd like having 4 ofs and they'd all be either you'd had all different artworks for each of them, or each of them would have to be the exact same. And if I had one foil out of them, it's used to give me the willies. Now I play like EDH and Commander a lot more. I don't mind having the single, because they're all singletons anyway. I don't mind it being a little bit shiny. And now I'm moving back towards, I think about all the foils I let go over the years.
Sure.
But yeah, I think the artwork's really, really pretty. And it kind of like, these felt way more ubiquitous. They felt way more easily accessible. Like some of the promo arts from the showcases from Eldraine, they seemed really few and far between.
I think it's because they did a lot of them and they did a lot of different ones, whereas these ones, they kept the constellations to the gods and the demigods. And there are extended art frames for a lot of the different cards, but these ones, they were like, no, they're in regular boosters, they come in foil and non-foil, there should be a couple in every booster box.
Well, the Planeswalkers also got an alternate art, didn't they, with that
oh yeah, you're right.
It was obviously the difference is that the gods are part of the sky, so then constellations, whereas the Planeswalkers are part of the story, so they tend to link in with these plots.
That's true. I would have rathered constellations for the Planeswalkers, but I guess it makes sense. Okay, so that was Clothis. The monocolor gods, I don't think we need to go through and break down each one individually, but as a grouping, how did you find the monocolor gods this time?
I think they did really well with them. I think that the more I play, because I tend to play... I play all of the 5 mono apart from Thassa in some deck or another.
Sure.
And maybe it's because I've been playing them for a long time, but I look at Helios and I kind of I'm a bit meh about him. I felt like they did things a bit more They had more interesting mechanics this time. Like before, they felt like enchantments that happen to have attacked on creature to them, whereas this time they feel a little bit more dynamic.
Yeah, right. So this is the key, right? So for my viewpoint on it, the way that the gods were portrayed in the older Theros blocks, although they were directly influencing people's lives on Theros as they are wont to do, they were definitely more these kind of higher ideals. So the abilities that they gave your deck, or they gave your creatures, or influenced the game, were more like static board states. So things like the Heliod one gave vigilance. You could scry with Thassa, for example. You could make a creature unblockable with Thassa as well, and with Heliod you could make a little enchantment dude.
That took an activation.
Whereas these ones, they just feel like, because the gods are at war, they're active, they are actually ready for battle, and I think their abilities reflect that. So, for example, the Perforos one, Perforos Bronze-Blooded, gives all other creatures you control haste, which isn't that much different from the old Heliod giving things vigilance, but haste as a mechanic is a far more get-up-and-go thing inherently than vigilance. Heliod directly puts 1/1 counters onto your creatures. Thassa is a Conjurer's Closet effect, which flickers something at the end of the
I think she might be the most powerful.
She is very good. I mean, I've put Heliod in my Karlov deck. I think that's going to go off. Yeah. But I think the gods, they're all ready for battle, and I think their static abilities reflect that. And I like the fact that they've not changed what they do so drastically, because they are still, because of the way they work in Theros, there's still these ideas which people have to adhere to. They can't just suddenly completely flip what they want to do. But they definitely feel a lot more like they're battle ready. The other ones, you wouldn't necessarily want to be creatures. I kind of feel like these ones, you want to get them to be creatures and start swinging with them.
Yeah, I feel like the first Theros block, we kind of had to accept that they were there, like the gods were there, and this is what they represent. Now we know about the gods, they kind of need to have a more active role. Like the way I mentioned this when Erebos first got spoiled. Back in the first one, all of their artworks are kind of sat on the horizon. Like they're a bit distanced from you. Like they feel like untouchable.
Yeah.
Whereas if you look at the artwork for the Erebos from this set, he's like standing above you. It's like you're in the Underworld and he's towering above you.
That Erebos artwork is fantastic.
It's phenomenal. And it feels way more that they're actively... No, that's, I guess,
Perforos,
the point is...
the Bronze-Blooded, he's erupting from his mountain as opposed to just being above it. Yeah.
Exactly. Even Thassa isn't on the horizon. She feels... They feel way more present.
Yeah, sure.
They feel way more tangible. And again, I'm going to get into this later about how I think they can push forwards with this. I think Nylia's the only one who feels still distanced.
Well, I think with Nylia, they got the same artist, Chris Rand's, come back and do her artwork, and he also did her Demigod as well, Renata. She is in a very similar pose, however... It looks, just to me, just kind of looking at it visually, the older Nylia, she was, again, kind of half her body was behind the horizon, being this kind of almost constellation-y looking thing. Yeah, whereas in the new one...
Keen-eyed, she's galloping across.
She's actually in the... So is it what's the forest? Setessa is where it is. Whatever the forest is, she's actually there. It looks like she's on the hunt, which I think is great. So it's a subtle difference. Also a nice little sort of difference in Thassa Deep Dwelling. She's no longer carrying the bident because obviously that got stolen by Kiora. She's now got a big old fishing spear, which is super cool. Although her constellation artwork still has the bident. Because constellations, I guess, inherently are harder to change.
Yeah, I guess, this idea of public opinion. And that's the thing, like, now considering they're all at petty war with each other, because essentially Heliod overreacts and everyone else has to kind of fall in line of go, well, it's like a nuclear war. Like, if one person presses the button, everyone else goes, well, I guess we have to kind of do it as well then. And I feel like, obviously, gods are very... they get very easily bridled up on things.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so that was the gods. Moving on from the gods, we have a new sort of set of ultra-powered beings.
New elders.
They're
so in fashion right now. Every set gets a different
Every set gets an elder of some sort. And these are the Titans. Titans. So we have 2 Titans, although it is definitely implied that there are many more rocking around. So one of the Titans I've got in front of me is Croxa, Titan of Death's Hunger. So he's a legendary creature, Elder Giant, 6/6 for a black and a red. And both of the Titans in this set, so you've got Croxa and Uro, Titan of Nature's Wrath. And both of these Titans enter the battlefield and have an ETB effect. So, for example, Croxa is, whenever it enters the battlefield or attacks, each opponent discards a card, and then each opponent who didn't discard a card, a non-land card this way, loses 3 life. But if they enter the battlefield and they haven't been, quote-unquote, escaped, they immediately get put into the graveyard. And then they have what this set's new mechanic is, which is escape. So Croxa, for example, is escape, black, red. Exile 5 other cards from your graveyard, and you may cast this card from your graveyard for its escape cost. So then it comes back onto the battlefield.
And then you kind of get permanent use out of it being a cheap 6/6 as well.
Yeah. So, I mean, firstly, let's talk about the Titans themselves, and we can talk a little bit about escape. So the Titans are these primordial beings that the other gods sealed away in the Underworld, and that's where Klothys has been, because she's been their jailer.
Yeah.
As I say, they've got more Titans in the story.
Well, the way that the picture looks, so the saga, the Green Saga of where Klothys is sealing, it's got a fantastic artwork, by the way. If you can look it up. But the idea,
the binding of the Titans,
and it does look like you've got the 2 that we've seen already in the forefront, and then it almost looks like there's almost like. You can definitely see at least 2 more in the background. Yeah, and they're not quite as easily identifiable. Like by
there's
what they look
there's
like.
one of the Titans in this looks a lot like Nebuchadnezzar, the painting Nebuchadnezzar as well.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
sure.
Which is a nice little touch.
But it'd be interesting to see, because I don't think we don't really wrap up the we don't have a conclusion to this Titan escaping problem. Which is interesting because it could then call into question everyone's faith in the gods. Now that you've got these kind of. Oh, they're gods, but they're not quite so nice. I mean, obviously Erebos isn't like the nicest guy in the world, but none of them are actively out there going like, eating everything to extinction.
Yeah, sure. So the card "Eat to Extinction" shows Croxa manhandling what's a sphinx? It's a sphinx. Yeah, it's a sphinx, and is about to devour it.
Maybe that's why Metamai doesn't get any cards, because he's been eaten.
He's probably been eaten by Croxa. So I mean, these Titans are meant to be these expressions of great power. So Uro is basically a giant maelstrom. Croxa's a never-ending hunger, this big sort of ogre-looking thing. And then there are a couple of other artworks which seem to show other Titans that are these giant beasts. I mean, how do you feel putting these... So obviously in Greek mythology, the Titans are kind of just important as the gods are in its mythology.
Well, yeah,
how do you feel about putting these in a set, yet another giant creature that's kind of rocking around?
I don't mind, because I feel like, and I'm going to keep alluding to this idea of where the story is going to go going forwards. I feel like this was basically a means of getting Elspeth back into the story.
Sure.
I don't know how long they maybe have a thought of getting rid of Gideon and bringing Elspeth back, but then and I imagine they looked at that going, what does Elspeth coming back, what ramifications can that have?
Yeah.
And they went, well, we've got a gap in the pantheon of gods.
Yep.
So maybe we can find a way to replace that in the same way. If Elspeth was coming back from the underworld, what else could possibly... What if she found a way to get out? What else would follow after her? What else could possibly be trapped down there? So I think that they kind of needed there to be this big fallout. I don't think Elspeth coming back, she might go back to Theros and be like, oh, what have I done? Like, I've caused all of this mayhem, and then she has to fix that problem.
Yeah.
Which could then cause her to, get seen as good back in the eyes of Clothis, for example.
Yeah.
Which would be a nice story going forwards. But I like the fact that they had to do these showcase mechanics with them, because you have the Phoenix and you have the Ox, which both do very interesting escape mechanic-y kind of things. Sure. One of them being quite like the Phoenix decks of recent with the playing spells out of the graveyard and be able to get them back.
Sure.
I can't remember what the Ravnica Phoenix was. But it's a nice powerful deck.
Yeah.
And then you've got the Ox, which kind of works into dredge strategies as well. So you've got these technically powerful escape mechanics, but then you also kind of need the big flagship ones.
Sure.
And I think that's why they didn't do too many, because it would have made them feel a bit strange. But I like
too many Titans.
Yeah.
It also would have been another cycle.
Exactly,
to fill
and that's
out.
the thing. You've got at that point, if you do 5 Titans and 5 gods, and then the 6th god, you've then only got 4 slots left for mythics.
I kind of feel with cycles as well. I kind of feel this is how not only the play design team and the design team in general at Wizards feels, but I sort of feel like this is how many of the player base feels. Is that whilst it's great to have a cycle because then everyone gets their favourite colour in the new thing, sometimes it just doesn't fit, and you don't necessarily need a cycle of creatures to tell the story of those creatures.
No,
and I
exactly.
feel that's very much when using only 2 Titans when we know there's definitely more. That tells the story of what they're trying to do enough whilst leaving slots open for other things.
Yeah, exactly. You don't want to use up all of... Especially if you go back, you don't want to use up all of the design space, potentially. 100%. And also, escape inherently is quite degenerate, because you just get to repeat and repeat and repeat. If you do that across 5 different Titans across all the colours, then all of the colours need to support escape as a mechanic.
Yeah.
Okay, you've got four colours, white being the only colour that doesn't actually have a Titan assigned to it. But even this way of this, they're actively always doing something. They come in, they die, they do a thing. When they come in, it's when they come in and attack that they have multiple triggers. Uro's insane. So when it comes into play, you gain 3 life, draw a card, and may put a land from your hand onto the battlefield.
Yeah, it's crazy.
It's Tulane. It's an Elder Tulane, basically. That's, skim away the white aspect of it.
I like the fact that they've got the Elder creature type.
I think it's good as well. I was joking. What I mean is I like the fact they pulled the trigger on it on other
planes,
on other planes.
Elder demon for bells and what.
Yeah, so it kind of opens it up
Elder
a little
dinosaurs.
bit more, because it makes the Elder Dragons, because they're a bit faded out and Nicobolus is now, for all intents and purposes, gone. The Elder Dragons don't exist anymore. So having other Elder... I mean, yeah, they're not the Elder Dragons. Again, air quotes. I do this every episode. You can't hear air quotes. They were a very specific breed and race. There should be able to be, like, Niv Mizzet should be able to be an Elder Dragon. I mean, he's 15,000 years old. I mean,
sure, yeah.
It should be possible.
I guess it's the definition for Elder for all these different creatures, including the Elder Dragons of older sets, is that they're somewhat primordial.
Yeah, exactly. And these do feel primordial. If you're the Titan of Death's Death's Hunger.
Yeah. So the Flavour text, so Eat to Extinction, I actually think is a card that shows off Croxa better than the Croxa card. So Eat to Extinction. Firstly, the Vincent Pruce artwork on Eat to Extinction is terrifying. If you go to our Twitter,
really
we
weird.
put it up there as well. But essentially, it's just this maw of thousands of teeth. You notice that his eyes are actually teeth.
His nostrils
mouth,
are teeth.
His nostril. In his hand, ridged along his fingers are all teeth. It's crazy.
Yeah, in his artwork as well, I think you can see him along his knees, along his arms.
Yeah,
his belly is just a giant maw.
His belly is just a giant
everything. It's crazy.
It's crazy. So the flavour text on Eat to Extinction is Croxa devours what he may, not for sustenance or pleasure, but because it is in his nature. He is unending hunger given form. Clothis, god of destiny. Like, if that doesn't say everything that needs to say.
It feels almost like Eldrazi-esque, but without it being... It's not eldritch, it's more, like, carnal. It feels more like...
Yeah, it feels more visceral than being this kind of... It's not in your mind, it's right there in front of you.
Yeah, exactly. And these were things that had to be contained by a god to be able to... And I do like that. It kind of creates this this sense of dread more. And I think this is what I like, is that this, again, we'll talk about this right at the end, but I do like the way that this can move the story going forwards. And I think mechanically they're not only interesting, but I feel like that they also are inherently very, very powerful. And I think 2's enough.
Sure. All right, other legendaries in the set, and there are a lot of legendaries in this set.
Yeah.
Almost all of them are some sort of reference to another actual Greek myth and some sort of analog allegory, which is fine. However, I do sort of think they missed a trick because they were trying to put so many different references to Greek mythology in there. I do think a lot of legendaries that we wanted to see come back kind of got squeezed out a bit.
Yeah.
So before we talk about the ones that are in the set, are there maybe just like one or two that didn't get a card that you wish had?
Well, I thought it was funny how Anthausa didn't get... I didn't think she was particularly interesting in the last set. Anyway.
Who, sorry?
Anthausa.
Anthausa.
Yeah, the green legend. There's a Hero's Podium
sure,
from the last
yes,
Theros set, and it's Anax, Cymede, and Anthausa trying to come up with some kind of heroic solution.
Sure.
She's not really there at all. I'm surprised that they didn't use her for the green demigod.
Yeah, I agree.
But that's a point of contention, I guess, as to whether or not it's better to keep bringing back old characters or expand.
Sure, I guess.
Do we go for breadth or width? In terms of legends.
I guess. I'm kind of bummed.
Breadth or depth.
He did get a saga. I'm kind of bummed that Medamai, the Ageless, didn't get one, which is the Sphinx Prophet. Sure. I mean, I don't know how you would have expanded on his character. His last creature card was pretty good, and he does get a saga, but I kind of think, he is the Sphinx on the plane. You'd think you'd get one.
Yeah, I'm annoyed that we didn't necessarily get Kaidal, Thrasios, any of the ones that got
Thrasios
partnered.
would have been brilliant for this set, I think. And actually, you say that about the demigods, which we're about to talk about. For me, Thrasios should have been the demigod for this set.
Yeah.
The legendaries we did get then, which are of note, are the demigods. So this is another new creature type. So we've got legendary enchantment creature demigod. There are 5 demigods, all of them in monocolor, one for each of the 5 monocolored gods. You have Daxos, blessed by the sun, for Heliod. You have Caliphate, beloved by the sea, for Thassa. You have Timret, chosen from death, for Erebos. You have Renata, caller of the hunt, for Nylea, and Anax, hardened in the forge, for Perforos. These are all uncommon as well, which is kind of interesting to note. They all have some sort of synergy in their power and toughness with something to do with devotion. So, for example, Daxos, blessed by the sun, his toughness is equal to your devotion to white, for example. Mm-hmm. And then they all have some other ability. Again, Daxos, whenever another creature you control on this battlefield dies, you gain 1 life. I think we're a little bit disappointed by these demigods, right?
I mean, I don't think you can expect too much from uncommons that are supposed to just be a kind of a basic representation of how the gods not even necessarily represent themselves, but who they choose to be their champions.
Sure.
Like, what do they consider to be? What do they consider to be worthy of championing?
It is worth noting as well that all of these characters are in one way or another deceased from the kind of main plane of Theros. So they're all from the Underworld, which is interesting because we don't get any... Obviously, because we have the lack of story. This is where it starts to be a little
What's
bit...
the thing? Is it confirmed that Caliphate died?
So Caliphate... So I'll actually go to the lore slides, actually, because I've got the lore slides on here. Each of the lore slides do sort of hint
to allude to that they have been
they've been brought back. So, for example, Caliphae's Caliphate is in life. Caliphate was the most skilled mariner to ever sail the seas, and that's the same for all of them. So
because I know they said about Renata, and it was an allusion to her being a very good hunter,
which is fine for things like Caliphate, which is actually referenced in the Caliphea, which is on a lot of Flavour,
which makes sense, I guess, because that would have been written well. Theros story and lore works differently because stories become legend very, very quickly.
Yeah, sure.
But you would assume, I guess it was from a different.
So that's fine. So she's a legend. Renata is meant to be a legendary hunter, which I guess fine. Again, she's a legend. But when we come to characters that we have seen before, which are Anax, Timret, and Daxos, we know Daxos is in the Underworld, or is a return, from his last card, Daxos the Return, which is in Commander set. Timret is a returned anyway, which he's always been. He used to be the Murder King. Best card name in Magic, Timret the Murder King. Anax is a tricky one. So last time we saw Anax, he was in battle Am I right? At the end of the last story?
Well, we know that because we had this conversation when he first got spoiled. Because in his little blurb it says about how now or you can still hear him saying Simedes over and over.
So we assume Simedes been taken off by Keranos.
We assumed that. Okay, so why? So maybe she died, and what we've had it confirmed is that Simedes died at some point in the old Theros story.
Yeah,
and now the sad part is that Annex then must have also have died at some point.
Yeah,
and he's not calling her out because she's alive and he's dead. He's calling out because she's dead. Yeah. And he's been torn away from her from the Underworld. At least that's my headcanon, which is very sad.
So the Returned in general seem to have some memory of their previous lives and do seem to go for what their old soul desires. So Daxos' story, for example, when he was a Returned, is that his whole blurb, if you bought the precon, which I did, is that he's trying to find Elsbeth, and the tragedy was she's in the Underworld.
Yeah. And it's almost like the same kind of analogue here with Annex and Siamede.
Yeah, I agree.
It's also strange that obviously none of them have return masks because they didn't get returned. Well, Timoret
does, but he is the king of the return.
Yeah, and I guess it's funny because we don't necessarily know how or why all of the different 5 colour gods have been able to interact in a way of getting a champion back from the dead.
They're also from completely different part of Theros' histories as well.
Yeah, so it's
I don't know, man.
At what point do they get to tap in and go through a catalogue of the history and go, so Athreus, who can I have back? Who have you got on loan already?
Yeah.
When they,
Who's already in the Underworld? Oh, what do you mean that, Peripheros has already got them? I wanted them.
Exactly. Yeah, so that's the thing, the fluff around the story is annoyingly vague and foggy.
We're going to talk about creature types in a little bit, but I'm really bummed out that Caliphate is not a Triton because it's Thassa. I mean, I don't want to pigeonhole.
Well, you wouldn't be able
Thassa.
to put a merfolk demigod on there anyway. Because you could barely fit demigod on.
You think that's like a formatting thing for creature types?
But they specifically said that they would have put subtypes on the gods.
Well, they're all just legendary enchantment creature. None of them have human or anything.
That's because they don't have space. They barely had enough space to do legendary enchantment creature god, and they've had to obviously put the size of the font down a little bit. Just to fit in
Renata's another human-y looking one. Why couldn't that have been a centaur? I don't know, man.
Oh, you mean within their actual
design of them? So I think it's fair to say that we're a little bit disappointed with the flavour of these demigods. However, when Daxos was first released, you actually have some quite good points as to why Daxos was quite good, right?
Well, yeah, but this thing, someone argued that. I mean, this is bouncing off the back of the white gets no good cards. This was before Helion had been spoiled, and people were saying, "Oh, but he's not even that good as a commander." And I was like, I mentioned this in a previous episode about it's a 2-mana uncommon, and it does, and then they were not only arguing that he was boring from a mechanical point of view, just does what white normally does. It's like it doesn't even make sense as a card. And I was like, are you absolutely bonkers? Because of course it does. His devotion, his the amount of strength that he has, or the amount of toughness he has, is equal to your devotion to white, which he has directly been the champion of.
Yeah.
And the fact that he's one of the few characters that has straddled life and death quite so succinctly, and obviously being a creature beforehand, being a return, and then being back to being a reformed demigod. He has straddled life and death more than most have. Yeah. So having this ability to gain life whenever a creature either enters or dies is perfectly reminiscent of his character. If anything, I'd say that he is the most flavourful out of all of them.
Yeah.
In terms of actually doing what I'd expect him to do. But also, even Timoret, we don't actually know that much about him. As much his 2 cards don't necessarily synergize between each other. He doesn't synergize necessarily with Erebos in his demigod form. But you don't mind so much because you've seen him before, so you don't feel too bad that he's. I don't know. You don't feel too bad that his mechanic didn't necessarily look exactly the same, and it's still graveyard based in some aspects. So you're like, oh, okay, I can kind of make something up that makes sense for this. At least with Daxos, you've got some background, and if the card makes sense with the background and context, then I don't really see in what way it's a flavour fail or a power fail.
Sure.
And again, maybe we're expecting too much from a cycle of uncommons.
I don't think you are. This is what I said in the Eldraine set review. So if you're going to do legendaries, make them have a point. This is actually a big gripe of mine with the legendaries in this set. Yes, they're analogues to real Greek myth. Yes, they want to have as many references as they can because WotC loves doing references at the moment. But some of them are just so pointless. There's the white legendary that has the Gideon plinth in the background.
Yeah, I was thinking. Yeah, there is one, at least one in each colour, because I was thinking of the blue one, Thrix, the the elemental giant.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So not only do we have Titans, not only do we have giants normal, we also have this elemental giant that's now also a legendary creature.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, it just seems very saturated. I will say with Daxos, just going back to Daxos, I do like the fact that his sword and shield is a sort of spearhead reminiscent of Crusader, which is Heliod's spear, and his old return mask. He's kind of wearing like a buckler, which is very cool.
That was very cool, yeah.
I'm very disappointed that these demigods don't seem to synergize with their gods outside of Renata and Daxos, vaguely. For me, I know you're not don't think it's as important. I feel like if they're on the battlefield at the same time, they should be bouncing off each other like partners.
Obviously Daxos and Heliod. But I like the way I look at this is that Daxos and Heliod work the best together because Heliod specifically made Daxos, like his demigod, and the rest of them kind of just had to go, well, if you're doing it, I guess we'll do it too, and they just did it kind of half-heartedly, so that's why it didn't necessarily work so well.
Yeah, I guess.
Whereas I think because Heliod was very deliberate in making his demigod, they synergise better together maybe in that. I don't know. Sure. I mean, that's weak.
That's just a headcanon,
That's headcanon.
All right, who are your favourite legendaries from the set? So obviously there are lots. We would need 3 episodes to go through all of them. So who's your top picks?
I really like Haktos. I love the Achilles the Achilles reference. He's a 6/1, must attack each combat for red, white. When it comes into play, you have to choose at random a converted mana cost of either 2, 3, or 4, and it has protection of all but that converted mana cost.
Sure.
Which is super interesting. Yes, it's just a 6/1 beta. Don't get me wrong, I'm annoyed about Boros not getting anything outside of attacking.
It's not necessarily breaking the Boros cycle,
but it's so interesting.
I agree. I was a little bit lukewarm on this card until I sort of really sat down and thought about it. You're right, it's very flavourful, it's very on point.
And okay, you can't make necessarily a very succinct commander deck out of it, but you can make a damn flavourful one. And that's, like, sometimes I don't need cards to be super powerful. Like, I don't find Tulane very inspiring as a commander, even though I bought the Brawl deck and I did convert it into it. I just threw some random nonsense mana dogs in there and it's a broken ass crazy deck.
Yeah.
That's not as interesting as finding a deck you have to fight to find the not fight to find the synergy with, but also make work in the context of its own flavour because it's got the flavour that's worth investing in.
Sure.
And Haktos seems like the kind of card that, okay, right, so I have to have a load of different protection spells, but I better make sure that I've got either they all cost it. None of them cost 1 or none of them cost 5 because he's always going to have protection from those. That you're already making it an interesting process.
It builds a nice meta game on top of the thing that you're already playing. And that leads me into my favourite legendary, which I think has a really cool meta game as well. And that's Atris, Oracle of Half...
Carry on.
I'm going to snip this bit. Atris, Oracle of Half-Truths. It's 2 blue and a black. Legendary creature, Human Advisor. A 3/2 with Menace. And it's when Atris, Oracle of Half-Truths enters the battlefield, target opponent looks at the top 3 cards of your library and separates them into a face-down pile and a face-up pile. Put 1 pile into your hand and the other into your graveyard. So it's the Factor Fiction effect.
Yeah, but slightly different.
There is actually another card which is closer to. I'm just looking it up now, but I love this card because I think it's just so flavourful. So, I mean, I think are we agreed that this is an Oracle of Phenax, God of Deception?
You presume so. Not only does he hold, not only is are they, because we don't know if it's a girl or we don't know if it's a girl or.
Well, I think that's it because it's Oracle of Half-Truths. It is a very androgynous thing. If you look very closely on the artwork, I looked at a blown up one. So this is Bastian Dame artwork. I probably butchered that name. But if you look at the high res, there are earrings and it does seem like they're wearing makeup. However, the form doesn't seem to be very feminine.
Yeah.
So I think it is meant to be quite androgynous.
I think it's also. I think it deliberately alludes to both Phenax and to Ashiok, obviously both being blue. Black.
Yeah.
You're going to find direct analogues to them anyway. But
sure.
The fact that it's hiding the face. Obviously, Phenax has a return mask on the face anyway, and then Ashiok doesn't have a face.
Yeah, Atris, I don't think. Yeah, it's not necessarily a return mark, but it's a headpiece, definitely style.
Yeah, I think the idea is it's supposed to allude to it a little bit, and the fact that it's a half truth means that maybe you're not supposed to know. It all works very well with that idea.
Fortune's Favour is the Factor Fiction that has a face up or a face down, and I really like this because I played. This was my promo actually, my pre-release, and I did play Atris quite a few times, and it was just so fun having you could bend and break this ability by having like a scry effect or Sensei's Divining Top would definitely, but
or even if you just pan harmonic on it to make sure you get
absolutely. But so I've built a commander deck around Atris and I've not included Sensei's Divining Top, even though I easily could, because there's no fun in that. Why would I want to break that meta game? It's all about, sort of mind games and all this kind of thing. I love the fact that Atris has Menace, because you have no idea what Atris is going to do. So how can you block it? You have to throw all your eggs into one basket.
If you've got a half truth, or if it's like that the riddle of the two door gatekeepers, one speaks truth and one speaks lies.
Yeah.
It requires two people to be able to find the truth, because it requires one person to go for the lie and one person to go for the truth. That idea of menace, I think that's inspired. You're not gonna, and plus it makes a 3/2 body much more attackable.
You just ask one door what the other one would say.
Yeah, I know the answer to the riddle. I'm just saying it. Point.
Oh, we better never get trapped in a labyrinth, because I think we'd die. All right, so that's Atris. So Atris is definitely my favourite by far. One legendary which I think would be remiss not to mention is Theros Enraptured, which is the Narcissus analogue. So 2 and a blue for a legendary creature, human, 2/3, uncommon. Theros Enraptured enters the battlefield tapped. Theros doesn't untap during your untap step if you control a reflection, and then when Theros enters the battlefield, create a 3/2 blue reflection creature token. So this idea that while the reflection might be active, Theros is staring at the reflection and is so enraptured by it that they can't do anything. That seems in gameplay really terrible. I did play against a couple of Theros, and actually it was interesting.
Well, I because we were fortunate enough to open a booster box between the two of us, so we did 3 sealeds against each other. So we managed to look through a lot of cards, see a lot of cards as they play, and I tried to build a deck around Illyrios with a couple of the blink effects.
Sure.
Because the idea is obviously they're not legendary reflections, so you can just make lots of them if you blink them back and forth. Obviously, he works really well with the new Thassa.
And the more reflections he has, the less chance he is to be active, because he's got too many reflections.
And the fact it's a 2/3 and it reflects into a 3/2.
Oh, that's really nice.
It's beautiful. The other thing that I like about this card is the fact that the reflection's looking at you. In the artwork for Illyrios. You get enraptured by the reflection, because the reflection stares back at you. You stare at the reflection. You're doing what he's. Oh, it's just when. The thing I used to love about Metal Gear Solid was that as a game, it would make you do things outside of the game to be able to play it. So one of the codes for one of the for the frequency on the radio was on the back of the case.
Yeah.
And it would say in the game, look on the back of the case, and you're looking around in the game around the back, and then you realise, no, intangibly the case that you bought, and the fact that it broke the fourth wall.
I like metas. That's why.
That's what that is. That's a meta.
All of our favourite legendaries have some sort of actual real world flavour to them, which is something that I live for. I think the best flavour is when it affects the game. I will just mention as well that in the old Theros block, you did get the card triple blue Fated Infatuation, which was an instant, which did tell this story as well. It's kind of interesting that. It's interesting that they've got a lot of stories in this block. So they have the wings for Icarus wings.
Icarus and,
but it's interesting there. They got Daedalus, which is Dalichos.
Yeah.
It's interesting that they didn't tell these stories in the original block.
Well, one, I think they didn't have enough space to do all of them, because Greek mythology shockingly has a lot. I think this Fated Infatuation is a good example of one that they touched on, that because they didn't fully do it 100%, they have a chance to do it again in this one. Okay, you had Bearer of the Heavens in the last one, which is obviously supposed to represent Atlas holding up the world. And at the end of this set, spoiler, there's Heliod's punishment, where he is also having to take a great weight. But it's also so I think there was I think some of them they might have had to do too many across 3 sets, and this is another reason why 3 sets is kind of bad, because you have to do so many of them. But they didn't even necessarily do as many as they could have done. Which is interesting, because I was looking through obviously card by card, and there's a card Voracious Typhon. And I was looking up Typhon because it was an interesting card name and an interesting card type. And Typhon was actually the father of monsters in the original Greek mythology.
Yeah.
And they could have done a father of monsters character.
Yeah.
That could have been one of the Titans if they were going to do, say, a third or fourth Titan or whatever. And the fact that they don't, they relegate it down to just a random regular creature. Bear of the Heavens isn't even a legendary. Okay, yeah, it was a rare that did something incredible when it left the battlefield, destroy all permanents that were in play. It feels like something holding up the world. But some of them aren't going to be so specific, and also I think you kind of need to leave a little bit of space, because if we go back to Theros again for a third time, they've kind of done everything.
Yeah, but I think that's nice, because then it frees them up to actually use
then move, and now they can develop their own story within the plane. Yeah, like with Eldraine, of where if you go back, you won't necessarily need to do all of the fairy tale things again, because you kind of touched on all the ones that win you over, and now that they've won you over into the plane, they can kind of develop it how they want to.
Yeah. I agree. All right, just before we move on from legendaries, I'm going to talk about a legendary that's not a creature, and that's Shadow Spear. Very quick touch on Shadow Spear, because obviously being an inanimate object, we can't really talk too much about its
and
character.
as much as flavour goes, it doesn't look like it tastes very nice.
Yeah, so Shadow Spear. So Shadow Spear is a legendary enchantment, legendary equipment, that gives a creature +1/+1, trample and lifelink, and it removes indestructible and hexproof if you pay 1 from other permanents. So it's a god killer, which in the story, Elspeth, the way that devotion and faith works on Theros is if you will something into being, you can will gods into being. You can, if you have enough faith in something, it becomes real.
Thoughts and concepts become tangible.
Sure. So Elspeth, while she's in the Underworld, has this kind of obsession with Heliod and Crusaor to the point where, along with Ashiok's nightmare magic, because Ashiok is knocking around in the Underworld as well, she's able to create a facsimile of Heliod's spear and that Shadow Spear. It has the 2 orbs in it, very much like God's End. And it seems to be, it's got smoke magic around it. There was some theories thinking that, because it's kind of dripping, that might be Phyrexian oil, because she's also got nightmares of Phyrexians. You're not too keen on that?
Well, no, I'm actually the opposite. It's not necessarily a matter of, it is Phyrexian oil, because it was created from her nightmares. Her nightmares were a combination of the thing that had killed her, which was the spear. The fact that obviously she was so obsessed with trying to get vengeance on Heliod that she needed a weapon to be able to kill him. And obviously she's got all of this... I mean, her home plane, which we still don't know which it was overtaken by Phyrexians, and she was tortured as a kid by Phyrexians. And this is what caused her to spark and leave her home plane was basically fear of her life from the Phyrexian threat.
Yeah.
It is a manifestation as close as it can be to a Phyrexian Crusaor.
Yeah. And
the idea is that, I mean, I didn't realise this, like how strong Ashiok's abilities are.
Yeah.
And the fact that he can manifest weapons that then will remain as weapons and tangible weapons going forward out of people's nightmares. Especially, it might also be helpful in Theros because it's a place where your thoughts and your beliefs and your dreams and your desires and everything manifest more easily anyway. But to be able to tap into that, this is why Ashiok loved Theros anyway, because he could basically go, hey, give me 2 weeks and I can create a god. Yeah, I mean, I can do this. It's not necessarily supposed to. It isn't literally a Phyrexian weapon, but it is. It is. It's a manifestation
there's
of
this
a Phyrexian
idea
weapon.
though that people think that Elspeth's dropping Phyrexian oil all over.
No,
Theros.
this isn't unless they try and go back and do the whole thing they did with Kana, going, oh, actually, no, he's dropped oil on all these places to be able to give potential plot points in the future.
Yeah.
I don't also think Phyrexians, like, this is the worst, because so many people off the back of this jumped on it and went, oh, but what if people start believing in Yawgmoth in Theros? Won't he be able to then come back as the Death God? And obviously, one of the main points in recent, the oldish story is that Yawgmoth is dead. Yeah. I know a lot of people want him to come back, and they might still find a way to do it in some fashion or another. They kind of obviously showed you the Thran Physician version when he was a human, but you can't, he's not going to. He's not going to go back. Sure. But the fact that Ashiok has then found out about these Phyrexians and gone, what? There are these really horrific things that are way more horrible than I could even have thought anyone... Well, let's go over there and see what we can do and mess around with that.
Yeah.
Which is very, very super interesting. He basically turned around to Theros, fucked everything up for a little while, went, Elspeth, here's a really, really powerful weapon, off you go, but I'm just going to go and look after that Phyrexian thing.
Sure.
Which tees into a very interesting... I mean, that would be really interesting when we go back to New Phyrexia.
All right, we've got to keep moving here, got to keep moving on. So we're going to talk about Planeswalkers. I don't know, even though this set has a focus on Planeswalkers like they all do, there's not actually a lot to go on here. So I mean, if we talk about Elspeth, because leading on from Shadow Spear, her new card, fine, does Elspethy white things. The thing that's interesting about her new card, Elspeth's Son's Nemesis, the thing that's nice and flavorful is that it has Escape on it.
Yeah.
Which is, am I right in thinking this is the first activated ability, the first mana ability, on a Planeswalker?
From Planeswalker, yeah.
Which is really nice. The fact that she doesn't have a plus on any of her abilities means that she inevitably
will
goes
die.
to bring up, which is kind of... Is that not at odds with the story of the set? The fact that she's trying to change her fate if her card literally always goes back to the Underworld?
I guess the idea is they needed to facilitate the mechanic a little bit more, so this was...
Basically, shut up, Andy, you can't have everything. It's like, I guess
more that mechanically you wanted... It would have been really powerful if she had a way to continue to build... The fact she's inherently always going to come back. People were saying that she's not particularly powerful, but you can't underestimate the ability of a flashback.
I mean, sure, no, she will always come back, which is, again, that's quite a white thing.
A Planeswalker with flashback is pretty insane.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. All right, the next one, I guess, I mean, you've been speaking about Ashiok a lot, because they are not really... They seem to have had so much agency in this set. They were in the damn trailer, for example, and all we really get is the card and a couple of other mentions.
You get a couple of you get Rashok's Erasure, and you have obviously the actual like card itself, which is very interesting. But again, kind of like the last one, a lot of the interesting parts of his story come from outside the cards and outside the set as a whole.
Yeah.
Like Ashok's story was very interesting. How he interacted with Fenax, and how he interacted creating cacophony. And then obviously he had this.
They. Ashiok is they.
Sorry, Ashiok is Ashiok. Ashiok had a lot of interactions with Daxos. That was my biggest disappointment. Not Daxos, sorry. Greatest Thief in the Multiverse.
Dak.
Yeah, not Daxos, just Dak. Because there's Dak and Daxos. Fantastic, good. So you've got, so he had, Ashiok had a lot of interactions with Dak. I was really annoyed that in War of the Spark we didn't get to see the combination that he was just back and then dead, which is annoying because I thought that was going to be the way that Elspeth was going to come back. I just thought Dak was going to be a bit more involved in it, which is annoying. Obviously Ashiok had a lot of involvement in Elspeth coming back. The fact that he kind of showed this ability to manifest weapons and I was going off to, I feel like it was set up. I felt like they put him in a setting, they gave you a little bit of allusion to who he was, created all this hubbub, everyone's like, oh, Ashiok's so cool, Ashiok's really interesting, kind of gave some superfluous story, well not superfluous story, but ancillary story outside of the set, and then he was still in the set now, gave him some agency and having an interaction with helping Elspeth get out, and then has kind of left him to go and do something a little bit more interesting and powerful later down the road.
Sure.
Again, this isn't a set based around the Planeswalkers as much as it's a setting, things are happening, and it's all based around Elspeth specifically escaping the Underworld.
We do get a new Planeswalker, Calyx. Interesting.
Yeah.
I'm not sure on Calyx, man. So
is it functionality? Is it flavour?
I mean,
is it both?
It's slightly both. So I think, firstly, I will just prefix this: the Magali Villeneuve artwork. Can you tell I'm a Magali fan? For the regular Planeswalker art is exquisite.
It's stunning.
Can't fault that. So Calyx is a green-white planeswalker. Firstly, let's have a look at why the colours are. So Calyx is a constructed being, which Klothys has her agents of fate that she creates. It's not that she turns normal beings into them. She creates them to go and enact her will on the physical planes of Theros. So Calyx is a constructed thing.
Yeah. Does he have a soul?
Can a constructed being from mana, like the way that angels are, like the way that demons are on most planes, can they have sparks? No, is my opinion.
Yeah.
I think if you say that, so obviously you can put a spark in something, so Khan is a construct, but he got a spark from an outside sword, from Venser. And some people think that maybe Urza is another place that he could have gotten this spark from.
Yeah, well originally he got he was part of the he did a Glacian's spark inside.
But essentially he's got an external spark, right? So if you're saying that Calyx, who is essentially for all intents and purposes is an angel, because it's a denizen of a god, then you have to start opening up the door to angels having sparks, demons having sparks.
The noise. Well, I mean, obviously Obnixilis not included because of the circumstance.
But he came later, the same way that that Tybalt is a devil. So the way that Calyx gets a spark, Calyx is an agent of fate created specifically to stop Elspeth from changing her fate and leaving the Underworld. When he sees that Elspeth escapes via planeswalking, when she finally is able to do so, he basically gets rage quits and has a bit of a tilt.
He has a breakdown, basically. How can I do my job? Does not compute.
And his spark ignites because he's having a hissy fit.
Yeah, the way they describe it, which is really interesting, is basically he saw what he needed to do, had a spark of imagination, and it's like, oh, get real. And then and follows her. It's like you can't just will yourself into being a planeswalker.
Doesn't happen. What kind of great tragedy was it that you couldn't do your job anymore?
Oh no, don't get me wrong. If you were very aware of your only function in life and you weren't able to succeed in it anymore, I can understand that might be a little bit harrowing. I get that. But it might not be quite. It might be akin to being buried alive or something like that, like how Domri was. I get that. The point that annoys me is that it's a single set. You can't have as much flexibility for story arcing, but we don't see Calyx as a creature, so we don't even know kind of what he is outside of being a planeswalker. We don't really see what his functionality or what his ability would be. He might just be a vanilla 2/2 human, or human construct, a vanilla human 2/2 construct. That would be obviously makes it much less interesting that he's now a planeswalker.
But why did they have to say in the story that these were completely made up by? I mean, if I'm wrong by this, and they are mortals that she's turned into it, then this whole point is moot. But I'm pretty sure that I saw in her lore slide that it says that she creates these agents of fate.
I don't think it's that she found someone who already... Because obviously no one really believed in her, otherwise she would have been... Or they'd forgotten about her.
Yeah.
So I don't think she found one of her lost disciples and gave
I've
them
got Calix's
newfound...
lore slide here. So Calix was created as an agent of fate specifically to reweave Elizabeth into this pattern. So he's creation. So I just don't think that this...
I guess
this
maybe
works.
the whole point is that belief manifests itself on Theros differently.
Yeah.
So if you believe yourself to be able to... If you believe the need or believe the functionality of yourself to be a certain thing, it might... It's one of those how do you summon creatures to the battlefield kind of things, of where unless they give you a distinct answer, which I think if they did one way or another, there's no way it's going to be satisfying. Like Mowu got a lot of shit for being like, oh, he's made out of stone, or it's a magic collar, or people always find annoyances in the exceptions to rules, but exceptions to rules tend to be the more interesting things.
But this isn't interesting. This is just...
it's not interesting. It's that it doesn't have context, so we don't know whether it's interesting or not. We've just got to assume because they go, yeah, it's fine, it happened.
Yeah.
The fact they've just gone, yeah, it's fine, it happened. That's the thing that's annoying, because it doesn't have a justification, and it's difficult for you to manifest a headcanon that works when you've already been told so distinctly that the law and the rules of the plane are a certain way.
I'm also, this is a bit of a side note, this isn't really something to go along to. This is kind of my theme for this set. He's another human looking thing.
Well, this is another big thing. He could have again been a centaur, could have been a satyr, well, not a satyr.
Could have been a minotaur.
Could have been a minotaur, yeah. Yeah, that's fair.
Okay, cool. So I think
we didn't actually talk about his mechanics in any way, shape,
well, no,
or
but
form.
the thing is, though, his mechanics, right? Like, so they're to do with enchantments, and which is fair enough, and I think that's fair. But I don't think that's his biggest thing.
I think
it's okay as well that he's green-white. I think that's fine because of his nature. I did get a bit weirded out that he was to do with the green red god, but the fact that he's green-white because he's essentially a cop, is fine.
Well, I think that's the thing. The difference in the flavour of the two of them, I think, is very easy to work out because of the way that white is totalitarian in its belief, and he would have been. He wouldn't have necessarily as much emotion if his functionality wasn't to feel. If his functionality was to serve that function, and that function was a green-white function. And I like narrow planes as well because I think mechanically it makes them much less ubiquitous. Unlike certain ones like Oko. And even Ashiok's quite narrow, narrow, quite broad in terms of what he can do, but because he's a bit more expensive, you don't want planeswalkers in every set. That's one thing we didn't necessarily talk about across any of them, but all of their mechanics feel like they can work well in a certain circumstance, but not in loads of them, so it makes them much less uniquely powerful. Well, it makes them more uniquely powerful, much less broadly usable, which I think is fine.
Sure. Okay, we've still got quite a bit to talk about, so let's move on. I don't want to touch on this for too long, because I actually think this is something that we could talk about in a much broader context of Magic and how they design their sets. But just quickly on the creature types of the set, I thought they were an absolute mess.
Yeah, you're right. Why are there too many?
Why are there too many? There are so many different creature types. And actually, I did a little bit of digging. So this is the Greek-inspired set, right? So that's not to say that they can't take inspiration from other things, especially if, say, they have tribes that they need to feed or any of this kind of stuff. And it does seem like they've also folded in Persian mythology into this as well, which is very geographically quite close to the Greek mythology and that kind of thing.
Just across the mountain range.
I would say that this actually completely dismantles the flavour of the set. So I've got I was looking up the different what was in Greek culture, what wasn't, because I didn't want to be like, well, they didn't have this in Greek myth, and actually they did, because Greek myth is very varied.
Yeah.
But so let's talk about the Sphinxes. Obviously, you have Sphinxes in Greek mythology, but the Sphinxes in Greek mythology are usually always female. They have male Sphinxes. The male Sphinxes are Egyptian. That's just a little thing for me. Obviously, they can do what they want with that, but it's just worth noting. The Griffins and Manticores are very Persian. They're not Greek. Why is there a griffin in this set? How many winged creatures can you really crowbar in?
You've already got Pegasi.
You've already got Pegasi. You've already got other things that can fly.
You've still got birds and stuff. Yeah, why
is a griffin in there? It just... And all right, I'll get to my point in a second. Manticores are also Persian. The Manticore being the face of a man, body of a lion, tail of a snake, or tail of a scorpion.
Yeah.
Why is there... Why is this?
You've already got
set?
chimeras. Why you also
Manticores were also in the Egyptian set for Amonkhet.
Yeah, and they worked very succinctly with that.
I was going to go off about chimeras being the sort of the three-headed amalgam of animals, but actually chimeras are in Greek mythology.
Yeah, plus I quite like... I don't mind ones that were already in the previous sets so much. Like, I like them doubling down on certain things. Like, chimeras felt like a very... Like, Perplexing Chimera is one of the cards that I always think of when I think of Theros. Mostly because I use it a bit, but I think Chimeras work. I understand why Manticores can't work.
But why do they choose to have Manticores?
Are we going to talk about the Snake Lamia?
I mean, the Snake Lamia, so the fact that they... All right, no, we're not, because I don't have time. I think I'm actually currently writing an outline for a whole episode on, like, creature types and my gripes and everything, and the Snake Lamia will appear.
It should be a Naga Lamia, right?
No. No, we don't have time for this. So essentially, but my gripe is that some people like variety.
Yeah.
And if you have variety in every set, wicked, because then you can also, again, feed tribal decks in different formats, and you can keep your sort of very high fantasy thing folded into whatever mythology you're pulling from, fine. The problem is if you have all of the creatures in all of the sets in whatever way you fancy, then every set looks the same.
Yeah.
Don't have griffins in every set if it doesn't make sense.
Some aspect of uniformity would be... Well, not necessarily uniformity, but something a bit more succinct.
Just have it be more narrow. If you want to have sort of flying creatures, have chimeras, have Pegasi. That way that when someone builds a deck and people go, oh, you're having Pegasi? Yeah, because I really like Greek myth or whatever. Like, that's fine. Things like Ravnica and Dominaria already do the hodgepodge creature types.
Yeah,
don't make every set that way. And it's just my bugbear. Yeah. The biggest one, and actually I didn't see this until this morning when I was looking over the set, because it's only in the collector's boosters. There's a fucking dragon in this set. Why is there a dragon in the Greek mythology set? And I looked it up. There are dragons in Greek mythology, but they're more like giant serpents. Yeah. This dragon is a four-armed, hind-limbed, European-looking dragon with a fucking... Oh, it's got like a Spartan helmet motif on its head. I was so angry. Why is there a dragon?
You've
Why
already got phoenixes.
You've got fucking phoenixes. And I'm getting angry about it because this is something I do. I feel passionate about it. I just kind of feel like it dilutes the set. And whilst there are many reasons for diversity and more is more, not less is more, I get that. But I think it hurts the set overall. And that's just what I wanted to say. I don't know if you wanted to counterpoint that.
No, I completely understand. I agree in a fashion that people will say, oh, but if you put a little bit of if you put a few Pegasi in every set, then people can expand the tribe. If you do a set of Pegasi that expands the tribe much more, and it allows you to do tribal support. Yes, there wasn't much tribal support in this set at all. Okay, 2 different random sub creatures get lords. So there's an Archon that has gives all Pegasi lifelink, and it makes Pegasi. And then there's obviously Galia, who gives satyrs haste and +1/+1.
Yeah, we've got a satyr legendary.
That's fine because that's just one card, and you can put a few satyrs in the set and it works. But I do get what you mean. It does dilute it a little bit too much, and it does make it feel like it's trying to. And also, it doesn't feel like world building. It feels like oversaturated.
Yeah, and the legendaries, going back to the legendaries being a lot of human creature types, we got a satyr, fine, and we've had. Well, no, we don't have a legendary Minotaur in this set. We don't have a legendary Minotaur.
We did.
We don't have a legendary Centaur. Set. We've got a legendary Satyr, finally. Yeah. We don't have a legendary Sphinx in this set, I don't think. No? Why are they all humans? Like, just come on, diversify it a little bit more, man.
And also, there's
no legendary Leonins. And actually, I saw this. This was a tweet that I saw. Shivan Butt, who's on the CAG, tweeted at Ethan Fleischer about having a legendary Leonin, and Ethan Fleischer said when Ajani was more part of the set story-wise, they were going to. Ajani got cut, and then the Leonins got cut. Yeah. Come on, man.
Yeah, I guess we did get, obviously, Brumaz in the last set, and someone said, oh, we get so few Leonin. If you actually look at the original Theros, there was only like 8 or so. I think it was 8 or 9 across the entire block. So it's not like they've got that many more few. It just feels like the problem, I guess, with the set is because it has so much in it, potentially, you could really feel the things that were omitted a lot more.
Sure.
The other can of worms is there's nymphs, there are dryads, and there's a nymph dryad.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I agree.
Unpack that. There was a lot of contention about exactly how and why, what denotes the other. Are all nymphs dryads? Are all dryads nymphs? Why is there a nymph dryad, and a dryad nymph? Whatever.
Yeah.
Anyway, the points of contention on creature types might be a continuing theme on this podcast.
I will just say as a flavour, sort of like as a praising thing, once again, I'm blown away by the way that the returned as the zombies of this plane feel so beautifully unique compared to zombies of other planes.
Yeah.
I would come back to Theros time and time again just to see the return.
Yeah.
They're wistful, they're not aggressive, even though they do have armies, and Timoret is the murder king. Like they're not the snarling, mindless, biting, scratching. Yeah, exactly. They're they're almost pitiful.
Yeah, they're almost like they're not like nulls, aren't they?
Yeah,
it feels like.
And I think it's beautiful. There's Seth MacKinnon once again comes back with some returned artwork in this set, which is just phenomenal.
I think they didn't do as much with it because obviously the way that things are coming back feels different anyway.
It seems to be like they're treating the Underworld more. It's like a place of the trapped living rather than a place of the
Whereas
return.
last set, it was very much more about establishing the difference between returns and eidolons. Now we know them, we don't need to do so much of them.
Okay, we're running out of time a little bit here. I'm just going to talk about very quickly some of the good world building elements that are in the set. So we don't need to go on it too deep. It's just really nice to sort of see that they're doing things with this. So they do have lots of flavour text and cards that refer to the Underworld and their different planes. So you've got Phyleus, Neurono, Tisrus, Argonius, and Alicia. Phyleus being white, Neuronus being blue, Tisrus black, Argonius red, Alicia green, and they all have their own flavour to those things.
Yeah, they all have really their. They also have obviously the Elysian fields are a thing in Greek mythology. There's a lot of analogues here.
Yeah.
The fact that obviously Greek's great for the fact that it has this kind of semi-fantasy kind of theme. It's not like the fairy tales where they're supposed to be built in. I mean, allegory is always the basis of most of these stories anyway, but it feels way more heroes versus monsters in the way that the story works, and the fact that Theros has the fact that it tries to look at. The history of Theros is actually a lot more quickly established. They thought of the champion as being, as much as it might have been 8 or 9 different assigned people, they consider it to be one long saga of one character. The fact that Kiora beat Best the Sea God, which we'll come to in a minute anyway, is already an established story and trope, even though it probably only happened within the last couple of years anyway. It shows that Theros lore inherently is very deep and is very evocative, so it's really nice to tap into it because we as Magic players that like lore and are more Vorthosian, we want this is the kind of story that we like, which is again when we talk about it in a future episode why it kind of felt like it was a bit more of a shame that this was the one that took the hit story wise. But the fact that, as we said at the beginning, there is such depth and such density in the cards in this set that you really like, you can dig deep into it and it gets you wanting more.
Like, so you can see in a lot of the flavour text, you could have the Caliphea, the cosmology, and other throws in histories.
Cosmogony. I spent a good hour trying to make sure I pronounced it.
Cosmogony, I do apologise. We have a lot more depth into the Minotaur sort of realm of Scophos. So you have the Labyrinth of Scophos. Minotaur's got a little bit shortchanged in this set as well.
There's actually surprisingly, there's more of them than there are of Leonin.
Yeah, but
Satyr and Minotaur seem to be more focused on.
Yeah, but the fact that the Minotaurs in this set, you kind of have a sense that they have more of a society than being just these bloodlusty, man-eating things in the mountains. They didn't get much spotlight. I mean, the card Labyrinth of Scophos is kind of cool because that is their realm, and there are a lot of dual color Minotaurs in this set.
And there's the Warden as well, which directly interacts with that card, which represents Theseus and the Minotaur.
Which is really cool. But I just kind of feel like that could have been a bigger part of things. But yeah, as we say, this set is very dense, and there is a lot to look at. We could never do an episode where we talk about all of it, but it is there. I just feel that the MTG elements, the Magic the Gathering elements of this set could have maybe been boosted whilst having that flavour in the background, whereas the Greek mythology flavour is like, here's all the references. Oh, there's also a Magic story going on.
Yeah, it felt a bit more ham-fisted than Eldraine did. Eldraine felt a little bit more like naturally synergistic.
Sure.
This maybe clashed a little bit more.
The last thing I want to talk about before we do our kind of top wins and top fails of the flavour of this set are the sagas.
Yeah.
Sagas make a return, which, thank God, because sagas are brilliant.
I genuinely forgot that they weren't in the original set.
Yeah, they feel like they've been around forever, right?
Yeah.
Which, again, in its own way, is a bit of a flavour win.
If anything, it felt like Dominaria obviously has a rich history. Like Theros would have been the set. It feels like the set of sagas, regardless.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm glad they came back.
The sagas are great. They did an uncommon cycle and they did a rare cycle. Each of them obviously telling some kind of story. Favourite saga?
Mine is the first Rowan Games.
The first Rowan Games. That's cool.
Well, that does remind me of the Fate and the muses from Hercules. You know, when the terracottas and the black girls.
The beginning of the Disney one.
Yeah.
That's great.
It reminds me of that a lot. And I also like the fact that it shows a progression. The fact that you enter in, you get bigger. If you're the biggest, you get reward, and then you get a medal at the end. Which goes directly against Arena Athlete from the original Theros.
Yes, this has
where
been
it says
pointed
that
out.
you don't get medals. But what it shows isn't a contradiction. It means that the first Rowan game started with medals, and as they went on, it became less about the medal.
Yeah.
It became more about the heroism.
The gold token from this set is also a medal.
Yeah, and I also like the fact they brought it back, even though they didn't necessarily want to, because obviously it works differently to how treasure works.
They wanted to keep going with treasures, right?
But I'm glad they kept a gold for this set, especially considering it's the only iteration of it.
My favourite saga is actually one that isn't particularly powerful. I just really like the simple story that it tells, and that is the birth of Meletis, which is the white one. It's got a Farah on the card art. It's got a statue to a Farah who's god of the polis, the blue-white. So chapter 1 is search your library for a basic plains card, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle your library.
Find
so
land.
you're getting land. You're literally getting some kind of real estate. Chapter 2, create a 0/4 wall. Artifact creature, token with defender.
So make
build up your city.
Yeah.
Chapter 3, you gain 2 life. Live prosperously in your city.
Yeah.
I just think it's nice. And the sagas...
They all work really, really well.
The sagas are a way to tell complex stories really flavourfully. But I, just on the flip side, thought that was just a really sweet little, cool, this is what it does.
And it doesn't have to do... And people...
Creates a token, creates,
People try and be like, it's not even that, it does all the white things, games like... It's like, it's not ramp, but it's mana fixing in a way.
Yeah.
It creates a 0/4, you gain a couple of bit of life. It's a lot for... what people think about sagas is, you have to wait turn by turn by turn, but people don't really want to remove them because you've already got value out of them.
Yeah.
And it does show a story, it builds a progression. And there are some that work better than others, but I still think
the
sagas...
card arts in these sagas as well are very much worth noting. So it's the
so
Acroan War is just one I think we should highlight.
I've got that in my Flavour
Yeah, talk about the Acroan War.
So the thing I love about the Acroan War is that it shows it's very much the Trojan War, of where you can see in the picture. It doesn't necessarily show this it does, but it shows someone being kidnapped, then the war, then the recruitment of the armies, and then the armies fighting. Now that's interesting in and of itself.
That's fine, yeah.
But if you look halfway down, it's not finished. It's a weaving. It's on a loom, and it's not been finished. Being woven, and you could either say that the person who was weaving it was called off to war and couldn't finish it, or the fact that they were on the side that lost. Which is very interesting. I love the idea that you're watching history being made in front of you and it wasn't even completed yet.
Yeah.
Very, very clever. Very nice.
I really like it. It goes without saying that the artwork in this set is phenomenal. One of the things that I think we need to touch on slightly is the lands, the full art lands.
Yeah, the energy cards.
The energy cards from Pokemon. I can see people's point on that. So this cycle of lands was done by Sam Burley, was the artist for this. And they're all... sort of galaxy-based mana symbols.
Yeah, they're Nyx. It's like Nyx mana, isn't it?
Yeah. These are kind of split opinions. Some people don't like them, some people do. I think they're gorgeous.
I think they're really pretty.
Yeah.
And they work really well if you look at, say, the constellations next to them as well. You can tell... If this is how Showcase should work, it should be distinct and specific to the plane. Yeah. The reason why I like the Amonkhet full art lands is because they all have Bolus's horns in it. The Zendikar lands were the full art Zendikar lands were evocative because they were the first ones that did them. The first time that did them, and you should feel that the things that you keep distinct to your plane feel that they work within your plane, and these do. As much as you might not like them in the grand scheme of the game. In isolation and within the context of the set, I don't not only think that they're a really cool twist that doesn't affect much. It's only the basic land. Oh no, you don't like the basic lands. I'm so sorry that the normal ones would have been so sought after and played. Yeah, come on, it gives you more.
I do think that this is a choice that they should really only make once every few sets, because then we would lose individual card arts for planes, which are some of the best artworks in the game.
I agree, and I think that there's a lot to be said and undervalued in basic lands, and this is. I think it's just they're trying to find ways that they can push for the parts of the game that aren't interesting to be interesting, making every card in a set playable. The play design team wanting to make commons and uncommons as playable as rares and mythics. That kind of thing. You want every bit of your real estate to be worth something. Obviously, you don't want to keep upgrading everything and changing everything all the time because it doesn't necessarily. Again, it's too much sometimes. Yeah, but I think they're really pretty.
I think they are too.
I can see why they draw a line down for some people though. I can.
See but then as you say, it's one set's worth of basic lands. Go over yourself.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. So, we've spoken a lot about lots of legendaries, we've spoken a lot about different cards. I'm going to say pick one Flavour win that might not necessarily be a legendary. Yeah. It might not necessarily be something that's super splashy, but something that you just think is really succinct, really cool.
I've got a really good one.
Go.
Right, so Island on Philosophies, single blue for a 1/2, enchantment creature spirit. 6 and a blue, sacrifice it to draw 3 cards. So this is obviously like a little stopgap at the beginning. The thing that's amazing about it, if you look at the artwork, it's an idol wearing a toga pointing up to the heavens. And this is a direct mirroring of Plato as he's presented. There's a painting of Plato and Aristotle looking towards the ground, and Plato pointing up towards the sky, kind of mirroring their philosophies. And what did God, I'm so bad with the names in this set. Eracastos teach us about the nature of the soul. This is the flavor text of the card, by the way. Read it if that completely ruined it for you. But the nature of the soul for Plato was reason, emotion, and desire.
Yeah,
which is very evocative of Theros. Theros is all about that kind of thing, and that little tidbit is beautiful. The fact he's directly mirroring Plato, is beautiful.
And it's kind of nice because they used to do flavor texts in the past, which were like Shakespeare quotes.
Yeah,
and they've kind of moved away from it, which I think's good. Not everyone agrees.
Yeah, because it doesn't want real. You don't want real world.
I like this.
Reference.
It splits the difference. It has like a real world reference that is deeper than the card itself, or just being an homage. Like it's actually, I think that's beautiful. My one pales in comparison to that, to be honest with you. My most flavorful card in this set that's not a big splash legendary is Mirror Shield.
well, the thing is, I went for like real world meta reasons. You're going for mechanical.
I think it's brilliant. It's really cool. Yeah. So Mirror Shield is a 2-drop enchantment. I keep saying enchantment. 2-drop artifact equipment. Equipped creature gets 0/0/2 and has hexproof, and whenever a creature with Death Touch blocks or becomes blocked by this creature, destroy that creature. And the card art is a mirror shield with a Gorgon's face being reflected in the mirror shield. Yeah. So this is exactly the story of the Gorgon being turned to stone because of a shield picked up, or a mirror-backed shield turned to stone. I think that's just really clean and nice and playable.
That's the ginger brute of the set.
Yeah, it's the ginger brute of the set.
Where the card's mechanics and the flavour of the card not only work synergistic with each other, but almost make each other better.
Yeah,
like when you wouldn't have been able to make a card that good without the story, and this makes the story so much. It makes the story feel really tangible within the card to have mechanics that can actually make that thing happen.
Yeah,
and especially when it's always like, I love quirky abilities where you're like, oh, of course. I mean, it's not been done before like that, but that makes so much sense in the context of the card. Yeah, it just makes a lot of sense.
And I think it's just really sweet. It's really clean, and I think it's indicative of some of the best flavour of the set. All right, guys, that is it for our Theros flavour set review. There is a lot that we didn't talk about because this set is very dense. We will be talking more about the storyline and how it's been delivered in later episodes, but I think you can already tell from a lot of our discussions how we feel about it.
Yeah, we might have some more anger to our but yeah.
I mean, I don't know. There are good things as well.
It's a point of, and also going forwards, I think that they've, again, we say this a lot, Wizards does listen to the player base, and I feel like this might have been a fact of looking at how many blocks and how many sets they need to try and get into a year now, how many different worlds they're trying to build. If they build, say, every other set being a new plane, they have to well build them. Maybe they're running out of resources. Maybe they're having to reconstitute the format of how their story works within the business. So we can't criticise too heavily without knowing what the decisions go on back, but we can make some insinuations and we can make some educated guesses.
I think some educated guesses have been confirmed in recent articles.
So I think we'll have a lot to talk about and unpack.
But the overall flavour of this set, both artwork-wise, mechanically, and flavour text, I think has all been a net positive. There have been some drops, there have been some things we not agree with, but for the most part, this set is pretty cool, and it's really fun to play as well. It's really
fun to play. As we said, we opened up a box and we played with each other, and it's a really interesting set to play. It's got a lot of little bits of power, still hits all the notes from the last set while still having some extra like fresh swings on things. So
all right, guys, so if you want to follow us on Twitter and social media, we are on Twitter at mtflavouring. I'm at Andy Manface. Nathan, you're
at Fox in the Moon.
It's actually the Fox in the Moon.
I mean, you'll find it either. I mean, I don't really use mine.
No, you don't really use yours,
bad with technology.
You can also email us with mtflavouring@gmail.com if you want to get in contact with us directly. Please do follow us on Twitter, guys, and on social, because we are posting up every day our favourite flavour wins.
And it's helpful to get traction.
Yeah, the podcast is starting to pick up now. We have got a few of you out there that are listening consistently, which we really appreciate. So share this podcast with a friend, even if that friend isn't necessarily into the Vorthos side of magic. You might be surprised, because they might actually come out of the woodwork.
Open their eyes.
They might open their eyes to the wider multiverse beyond. But other than that, guys, thank you very much for listening. As always, this has been Magic the Flavouring.
See you soon.